using the start app command. It would be natural to have the start app command as the first column in the grid, but it is listed at the bottom because it was the last thing we defined when we populated the grid. So we move it by dragging it from where it is now to the top of the list in the tree view. Notice that the start app now appears as the first element in the tree view on the counter application, and it also is the first column in the grid. We now select the start app. The drop-down menu will show the shell executable that we defined earlier. We select the item, and we have now defined our first command. Because the start app is the first row in the first column, it is the first command to be executed by SmarteScript. Actually, that could be our first script. We can actually try to execute this one. All it should do is to start the application. To run the application, we click on Execute. Before the script starts, SmarteScript will ask us to name the report. Now we could just name it report 4, or we can rename it. I'll rename it to Start Application 1. And then I'll just press OK to start the script. As expected, that starts up the counter application. There'll be no interaction with the application because we haven't defined any yet. When the script finishes, we will now see a report, which is a detailed summary of everything that happened throughout our test script. There's also a report summary on the right side that shows a green symbol which says the test was successful. I'm about to hide the object tree on the left, but before I do, I want you to notice that I have reorganized the objects a little bit. I've put the objects in an order that is optimal for how I want to define the script. It's partially aesthetic, but it also allows me to define the script with much fewer rows. Well, we started the application, but we also need to make sure that the application has the correct values when it starts up. So the next step is to set the expected value. So in the column for expected value, I'm going to enter the value 0. Then I have to make sure that the script reads the value of the counter, so I'm going to activate the read counter value. We do that simply by selecting it in the drop-down list. There is only one entry there because it's the only rule that we have put in that particular column. Next, I need to scroll right to get to the other columns. The next column is value read from text box. That is actually an output column, and it displays the value of the generic string, which was the implicit variable. And so the next thing I really need to do is to go to the compare expected versus real counter value. So I need to activate that cell so that the comparison of the expected and the real value actually occurs. And there is only one possible value to pick in the drop-down, which is the actual comparison of the two values. So we select the item, and by having done that, we're basically saying that we will, at this point in the script, compare the expected value with the real value, and if they do not match, then the script fails. All we really did was to activate a few cells, but by doing that, what we have said is we want to start the application, we want to set the expected value to 0, we want to read the value out of the text box and compare the value of the text box to the expected value. I could of course run the script, and normally I would, but I've already shown you that feature, so I'm going to move on. I'll rather show off another feature of the tool, which is to create a scenario. Now, scenario is a logical grouping of steps. The first row now actually makes up a nice little grouping of commands. What it does is it starts up the application and ensures that the value of the counter is 0. We'll group this into what we call a scenario. We're going to call that scenario check initial value. To define a scenario, we right click on the set of rows that we need, in this case only one, and select define edit scenario. We must give the scenario a name, which we can do in the scenario name property. We wanted to name our scenario check initial value, so I'll do that and click OK to dismiss the dialog. There are a few more interesting properties on scenario. Notice that there is something called loops that allows me to repeat the step based on some rules. You can also color the scenario, but for now we'll just leave it simple. There is a special view for scenarios, and we'll take a look at that. When in the scenario view, we can look at the script as a sequential set of steps. And I can here see the steps Step 1, user invokes SmarteScript function shell, that is start the application. Step 2, user retrieves a string data, which is basically setting the expected value to 0. User invokes SmarteScript function info, which reads the value of the text box, and then we're doing the comparison. We'll move back to the grid view. I'll skip ahead a little bit to a complete script. Here we have a complete script that follows our test plan. Notice here that we have 3 scenarios. We're checking the initial value that we defined together. Then there is a happy path, which is actually incrementing and decrementing. And then we have the check for negative values. This makes up a complete script, and all you can see here is basically a table with some filled in grid cell, and that's exactly how you define the script in SmarteScript. In the offline lab I'll actually give you the script so you can try it out, but for now let's just click on execute and see what happens. Now that we use scenarios, SmarteScript would actually allow us to select which scenarios we want to run. I'm going to select all of the scenarios. I'll enter the report name test counter application, and then I'll click OK to start the script. This would start up the script, which will start up the application, do the increment and decrement as specified. And when SmarteScript comes back, we'll see a detailed report of everything. And again, you can see that our test was successful by the big green icon on the right hand side. Well, that concludes the demo of how to create the script in SmarteScript.